figure out this part, we sometimes miss the answer for the whys and the that's. Does that make sense? Someone want to do me a favor and read Revelation 13, 11 through 18? Since you got it, Jan, you want to hit it?
Yeah, I will. Then I saw another beast come up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like those of a lamb, but he spoke with the voice of a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast, and he required all the earth and its people to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. He did astounding miracles, even making fire flash down to earth from the sky while everyone was watching. And with all the miracles he was allowed to perform on behalf of the first beast, he deceived all the people who belonged to this world. He ordered the people to make a great statue of the first beast, who was fatally wounded and then came back to life. He was then permitted to give life to this statue so that it could speak. Then the statue of the beast commanded that anyone refusing to worship it must die. He required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or on the forehead. And no one could buy or sell anything without that mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number representing his name. Wisdom is needed here. Let the one who, with understanding, solve the meaning of the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His name is 666.
These verses here, I could probably come back to over and over and over again, because there's so much inside of them. But I want to kind of share with you, how many of you ever read or listened to the Left Behind series? Okay, so there's and I will not give you the exact reference because I can't remember where it is, but throughout the whole series they have the Trib Force, right? And they're trying to actively go against the Antichrist, right? And they have an insider named David Hasid. And David is a guy that has a lot of technical information, right? Mm-hmm. And as the mark of the beast comes up for David, David knows he's not going to take it, so he's a Jew. He moves on to Petra, or one of those little cities, cities of refuge, right? But inside, they have this guy named Chang, and he's 17 years old, a computer genius, and he has come to know Christ, and so is his sister. And his sister, when he was in China, she kind of broke off from her parents, and she didn't care about this at all. Come on in. How you doing?
Good. Good evening.
So we just started up, so we're reading in Revelation 13, 11 through 18. So in that circumstance, we had Chang, who's a 17-year-old kid, and he comes to work for the Antichrist. And in the story, we have this situation where Chang is told everyone has to have the mark of the beast. He doesn't say the mark, but explains this little chip. And Chang says, I don't want to get it, because he knows that he's a Christian, right? And so, and his dad's just pushed him, saying, you're absolutely going to get the mark of the beast, essentially. And in that situation, he blacks out, and he sees video cameras, security cameras on there, and he blanks out, and they take him down, and they put the mark of the beast on him. And it's at the exact same time frame, he has the mark of the beast on his head. He's got the seal of Christ upon him as well, okay? And a little bit of a reference of Revelation 9, I think it's 4. And it goes through the story with his conundrum between having both marks on his forehead. As he gets out of the Antichrist lair, he goes to one of those areas, the refuge in Jerusalem, and he's always wearing ball caps down on his head, doesn't want to show his mark. And then he's really upset about this issue, and then they pray over him, and boom, the mark of the beast goes away. And as a fiction writer, and I've mentioned this to you before, we're finishing up the first of the books. It's called Foretold. And as a fiction writer, but also understanding prophecy, and my cooperating guy Jeff Swanson, who's in the ministry, one of the things that we're very, very careful about is being true to Scripture instead of being true to a fiction point, right? And if you watch movies that want to say something about the Bible, they want to twist it to make it effective for them. Like in the movie Noah, I don't know if you ever, I don't recommend you see it, it's the more recent one. There's a whole bunch of movies like that, and they just twist it a little bit. Now, I don't care if you twist a book about, the Denver Broncos in their 1998 season, okay? I don't care what you're going to come up with that. But when you come up to the Bible, I get really upset when you start twisting it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I think that's some of the problem. What we need to understand is the mark of the beast is a once and for all circumstance. And when you have that basic understanding, that once for all situation is very important. And it's that it is, and there's an answer of why. Okay? So let's talk a lot about the whys. First off, we have the beginning of the tribulation. It's a 7-year period like we talked about, okay? So middle and end, okay? In this first part of the situation we've talked about, this first 3.5 years, we've got the Antichrist and the false prophet that come up, okay? And as we talked about here, the Antichrist exists, because I think we're close to the time frame. I think he's alive. And as we've always talked about, I think a viewpoint that's very interesting, Mark Hitchcock is a prophecy teacher that mentions that he believes that the Antichrist that Satan's always had to have an Antichrist in his back pocket. He doesn't know the day or the hour. So he's got to keep someone there ready to come on the scene. Fascinating viewpoint. Yeah. Now, in this time frame, we have the Antichrist has a body, a soul, and a spirit, right? And when he comes into his own, into the beginning of the tribulation, which is Daniel 9:27, in Daniel 9:27, the beast enters him. It's called the first beast that's dealt with here. Every time the beast shows up on the earth, millions of people die. And so we think of this time, some prophecy teachers will think of this time as a relatively not that bad, more peaceful circumstance. I would beg to differ. Okay? I really would say that's not exactly what happens when the beast shows up. In the middle of the circumstance, and it talks about this in verse 14, he has a sword wound and yet lives, okay? The circumstance of the indwelling, it says, woe to you, earth, for the devil has come down with great wrath. He's kicked out of heaven, okay? And he comes right in to the Antichrist in this last 3.5 years. So it's not just the beast in this circumstance and the Antichrist, but now all three entities are inside of this one bad dude. And if this, with the beast, shows up, how bad could this possibly be? Does that make sense? That's why I believe this is much worse than we ever realize what it is. Okay? And as we've talked about before, I do believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. We're going to talk more and more deeper on some of those issues as well. Now, one of the keys that we have to understand is something, as I started to look at this, part of this situation here is that the beast is something like, I like to call it ownership. Or excuse me, the mark of the beast. It's, as an ownership, it is changing the whole path of how we look at this stuff. Okay, what does that mean? When we live, we're first born, our life begins, we have the nature of sin in us, right? And we're in that situation of nature. So we have our body, our soul, and our spirit. At some point in time, when that time frame of bar mitzvah is celebrated, at some point of an age of accountability, whatever that is, we notice sin in us. Okay? We understand what it is. a 6-year-old doesn't get it. Sort of has a clue, maybe that's a bad thing and that's a good thing to do, but doesn't really get the fullness of what that sin is. But there's a point in time where they really get it. And since we have kids that are closer to that age, we have one child, he's 17. I remember that time frame when he started to notice that in his own self. Then, if you don't do anything about it, so you have what it's called, it moves into what's called spirit death. Okay? There's a death that happens inside you. That's why you're noticing that sin. Okay? And you have two choices. You either choose to ignore it, right? Which leads you down the path to body death and soul death. Okay? Because we've already had a death of the spirit that happens. Or we move into spiritual rebirth, okay? Or the spirit is reborn. What does that mean? What's John 3, right? Where Nicodemus comes to Jesus and he says, you have to be reborn. What do you mean? I have to go back in the womb again, right? It makes no sense. But that's what Jesus was trying to teach him. Now, down the road, we'll have our body, hopefully not all of our bodies die. Hopefully we have the rapture, right? But for most people of the earth, the body dies too. The soul and spirit are combined, boom, in heaven, right? Then our body gets reborn in that rapture process. Okay? Does that make sense so far? Why does this happen? So I just want to share with you a few things that we have to understand, because it's so germane to this point. It's not funny. And most of you already know this, because I know that you're Christians in this room. But sin, it's an old Middle English kind of terminology was utilized. When we used it, there was a mark. There would be a little tiny spot that archery terms would use, and it was a little tiny spot, and you were shooting at that spot when you were trying to aim for it. If you missed a little bit, if you didn't hit the mark, they said you sinned. Okay? So it doesn't matter if you sin a lot or a little, it doesn't matter. That's the beauty of that word. Okay? In Greek, it means harmadia. Okay? And harmadia is the same mentality. They pulled it correctly when they utilized the word for sin. Now, what happens in here, it's the mark of the beast hijacks this above process. So what happens is that our body, and I think it's Hebrews, we talked about it last week, Hebrews 9:27, that says we live and we die once, right? And all the people of the world struggle with this mentality that whether maybe we can, survive after death. And we have Catholics and we have Mormons that pray for people in Mormon temples, pray for someone to come back to Christ, essentially, right? We have, all different things that believe that death isn't the end of this process. It absolutely is the end of that process. When the body is taken off of this earth, okay, or not, and we're in and seeing it with our soul and our spirit together, we will see things that we can't possibly imagine today. Wendy and I were talking about this, okay? In heaven, and this is just postulation, okay? But in heaven, we were thinking, you walk into heaven, and I'd be going, oh, I want to talk to him. So I shoot over there and talk to Moses, right? And I spend 1,000 years talking to Moses. And then I shoot over here and talk to Elijah. And do you see my point, right? But I think it's possible, just possible, and I want you just to consider it. Instead of just shooting over there, how many steps did I walk over of blades of grass that maybe later on I start to sit down and think about the grass and the cool things that are happening inside of the ground and the growth that occurs. How much growth would we go through in heaven? Okay? And just a thought, but the reality is all of the sunglasses of this earth are off.
and we see things for how they really